sessions. And that spread right across the region, which is great. Consequently, we're planning a joint online session with the Federation of Asian Cultural Promotion, probably in late October. And this is will be an opportunity for producers and presenters and venues to come together to talk about the ways in which we might emerge from this current situation. But anyway, more from the Secretariat on that in due course. So this session is to be moderated by Duncan Pescod, the CEO of West Kowloon Cultural District Authority. Duncan has been in this role since 2015 and is responsible for West Kowloon's strategic direction and day-to-day operations. He served for over 33 years with the Hong Kong government, during which he worked in various branches and departments. He is an active AAPPAC councillor now, executive councillor now, and a great advocate for the creative industries in the region. So without further ado, I'll now hand it over to Duncan, and I hope you all enjoy the session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Douglas. It's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for taking part in that very kind introduction. A couple of housekeeping points before we start. We think this session will be around 2 hours, through till about 12:30. We do have a lot to get through, I have to say. So I would ask participants to remain muted. It makes it a lot easier for those that are presenting. But please, of course, feel free to unmute at any time through the session. Questions can be typed anytime via the chat box, and I think I've seen 1 or 2 already points coming up. Barbara, particularly, I noticed you've joined us. And we will select questions to answer as far as we can during the Q&A session, which will be more or less in the second hour. So without further ado, let's turn to the topic, which I think, frankly, for all of us, really is the topic du jour. How are we adapting our business model to cope with the COVID-19 closures, cancellations, and let's look positively to the reopening. I think this is very much about how do we prepare ourselves to reopen, to get back into the swing of things. I have to say, I'm delighted to be able to welcome panelists from all across the world, from the States, from Australia, from Asia, and I value their contribution to the discussion this afternoon. We have people from commercial businesses, from non-profit NGOs, from national government entities, and of course hybrids, particularly like ourselves. We will hear briefly from each of the participants, the panelists, and I've asked them to briefly introduce how they're adapting and innovating their particular business models to address the circumstances and the changing needs of the economic sector that we're involved with. Some of the questions that I hope will be addressed include, have you identified new revenue streams and how viable are those going forward? What about fundraising? I think fundraising is always an issue for our sector, but I think particularly under the current circumstances. What is the role of our boards, the governance, and particularly government support to the sector? It's very interesting to see how varied it is across the world. There were some very interesting announcements yesterday from Europe, for example. And this is something that I think becomes more important the longer this situation continues. And finally, how do we leverage the new and existing partnerships with other arts organizations, commercial enterprises, creative and community groups, so that at the end of this situation, we all come out hopefully better, stronger, and really ready to undertake the challenges. We will have brief introductions and then a discussion, and I really do encourage everybody, be active. Please feel free to post questions in the chat column for our panelists. I want to get straight on. So I will start by introducing our first presenter, which is Claire Spencer, CEO of the Arts Centre Melbourne. I'm sure I don't actually need to introduce Claire to many of you. She's very well known and a very active participant in both regional and national programs. She has an amazing CV and has been involved, I believe, since 2014 with the Arts Centre Melbourne. And of course, playing a very lead role in the transformation of the Melbourne Arts Precinct in the heart of that city. So Claire, if you would like to unmute and join the conversation, please.
I'm unmuted. Thank you, Duncan, for that very generous introduction. I'm not sure how I feel about notoriety. I hope it's for all the right reasons, not the wrong ones. Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel and indeed to be part of this conversation. I think now more than ever, we do need to have a strong network. We need to share ideas with even more generosity than we've ever done. So I'm coming to you from Melbourne. I'm in my home. Like many of you, we've now been closed. The Arts Centre has been closed for approaching 6 months. It's 6 months next week, which is very hard to kind of comprehend, actually. So all 6 of our venues have been closed throughout that time, and we have a team of 1,000 people at ACM, all of whom have been who were sent home in mid-March and haven't been back since. But I don't want to dwell on that this morning. I want to talk about where we're at and what are the defining features of this crisis and how we've dealt with it that we're hoping will be part of our future as we come out of it. So it was quite interesting preparing for this session and sort of challenging yourself what's changed. And I guess I came to the conclusion, well, actually not very much has stayed the same. You know, really everything for us has been thrown up in the air. So thought about how we're working differently, what's changed in the business, and also I think what issues were present before COVID that COVID has actually presented us with an opportunity to start to address some of those concerns. So I've got sort of 4 themes that I wanted to talk about, and I promised Duncan I'll be brief. You won't have to cut me off. So we realised straight away that we would need to work differently when we closed. So we pretty quickly reorganised, you know, quite a large, complex structure and team into 3 critical business streams. So we had a group dealing with today, a group preparing for reopening, and a group keeping their eye on the future. And I think what's important here is that this was done very, very quickly and with a great deal of agility, much to our own surprise as much as anyone else's, because I think, you know, all of us who work in these big performing arts centres know that they can be really big ships to turn. So to move swiftly and with agility was something that was pretty shocking, to be honest, but was absolutely necessary to do at the time. So we flattened our structure, we streamlined, and we organised around what we needed to get done. It was very, very focused right from the beginning. And we started to dismantle old ways of working by necessity, because we weren't all together. We needed to find different ways of working remotely and how to get things done when we couldn't rely on the old face-to-face interactions. So I think that agility and that willingness to sort of spin the organisation to focus on what's important is a sort of a defining feature. The second theme was around collaborations, and we left our lawyers at the door. Cancellations, which were an immediate focus, were dealt with very collaboratively. Our aim was to facilitate as many companies and artists getting through this as possible. And we didn't want to take any company or organisation or individual to the edge by enforcing our legal rights. And, I think that's not always been the case when you're running your own business and you're dependent on commercial outcomes. You sometimes are forced to take the legal route, but with this situation, we're very fortunate working with some of our donors and working with government that we actually didn't need to do that. The third theme is around well-being, and I'm sure many of you have heard me speak about this before. It's something I'm personally particularly passionate about, but which has become even more important during this crisis. So it really has changed our business model to a much deeper level than it had influenced it before. And it was already pretty deep before, if I'm honest. So wellbeing for us has a few different arms. So providing ongoing employment for our team was something that we really focused on very strongly, particularly in the first weeks and months. Providing assistance to them for those who we couldn't give ongoing work to help them navigate the social welfare system in Australia, which many of them had never had to access before, and was very complex. Changes were implemented very quickly by the government, and the navigation of that system wasn't necessarily easy. So we put staff on particularly to help people support through that process. We sought alternative work opportunities for our people across government. So in supporting the state government in its response to COVID-19. So whilst people weren't working in our workforce, they still had paid employment. And then we also ramped up the activities of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. All of the materials that we've created over this time are available to all of you online through the Arts Wellbeing Collective website. And we communicated a lot, and we still are communicating a lot. And we realised pretty early on that people needed that connection. And working remotely, we had to find different ways to keep people connected and to keep checking in on people. To be honest, we were a little naive at the beginning that we could carry everyone through this, particularly when the revenues dried up so immediately. And we tried, but we struggled with a systemic issue that exists particularly in Australia around, we have a workforce that's highly casualised. So 60% of the people who work at Arts Centre Melbourne are on casual contracts. And we believe that that's something that really needs to be resolved. It's one of those pre-COVID issues that this is the time to address that and to provide more secure employment to people into the future. The last theme, just to draw out, is around digital, and I'm sure many of you looked swiftly to your digital channels as a means to keeping your audiences connected through this time, and we were no different in that. We had some recorded material from before COVID times, not much, to be honest. So we did commission new work and and did that proudly and stood by our pre-COVID principles of never asking an artist to do something for nothing. So we provided extensive paid work for artists in order to deliver on digital content, and also collaborated with other organisations, other partners who may have had content but didn't necessarily have the channels through which to broadcast it. At the moment, all of the content we're doing is free, so we've not monetised it at the moment. It's been funded either by government or philanthropy to this point, but certainly going into the future, monetisation of content is something we're really interested to look at. So I guess for us, in summary, many different models have come into our business. different philosophies have come into our business, and we're really looking deeply to understand what assets we have, whether they be physical assets, whether they be relationships, and to think really deeply how we can use what's available to us, what's in our control, and how can we leverage that through collaborative partnerships to increase the social impacts that we can have. So lots going on in Melbourne, despite us all being locked in our homes for some time now and for some time to come. So thanks very much. I hope that there were some seeds that were interesting in that for you. Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Claire. Some very important points around the areas of collaboration, agility, and of course, communication. I think often we tend to forget the importance of communicating both to our own colleagues and staff, but to the community as a whole. The artists who I know are struggling, in Hong Kong, very, very difficult. A lot of them are independent artists and they're simply not being paid. And I think that's going to be one of those areas that perhaps we can explore in a little bit more detail when we discuss these issues later. Thank you, Claire. Excellent. I'd like to move on, if I may, to our next contributor, Mr. Kim Chun-ho from the National Theatre of Korea. Mr. Kim has a fascinating background as a conductor of the Cheongju Metropolitan Traditional Orchestra, and I apologize if I've just massacred that name. Bear with me. Director of the Seoul Metropolitan Traditional Orchestra and the director of the National Gugak Center. He took up the role of CEO of the National Theatre of Korea in September of 2018 and is focusing on enhancing its public awareness through community participation and communications. Mr. Kim will speak to us through an interpreter. So please, Mr. Kim, I'll pass this over to you. Thank you.
We can't hear her.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kim, we're not hearing your interpretation, I'm afraid. Can we try that again? See if they need to be unmuted.
Is she
unmuted?
Yeah. Is Mike unmuted? How about her, his interpreter? Is she, can you call her? Yeah, because it's not working. Is the interpreter's mic unmuted?
Yeah, can you please unmute your mic?
Hello.
That's
Hello.
it. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Good morning. I am Kim Chul-ho. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, it is wonderful to gather here today with other art institutions around the world to hold a very important discussion. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we've been doing in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Founded in 1950, the National Theatre of Korea celebrates its 70th anniversary this year. And as one of the most important commissioning theatres in Korea, it's been a key player in the history of Korean performing arts. Our annual season runs from September through to June the following year and showcases some 40 in-house productions every year. every season. Our three resident companies are the National Changguk Company, Changguk meaning Traditional Korean Opera, the National Dance Company of Korea, and the National Orchestra of Korea. With a focus on these three resident companies, we continue to produce and develop contemporary shows which are based on Korean traditions. As well as our in-house productions, we stage special shows at each venue and invite outstanding works from Korea and abroad for the purpose of engaging with our audience. The NTOK has 4 venues, namely Kowloon Grand Theatre with 1,200 seats, Kowloon Theatre with 500 seats, and Hanel Round Theatre with 600 seats, and Kowloon Studio with 70 seats. We are a public organization under the Korean Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism, so the NTOK is entirely state-funded, and that means we can operate on relatively more stable financial resources compared to other art and culture institutes. Unfortunately, due to the impact of the Korean pandemic, many of our productions and projects this year have been either cancelled or postponed. We were able to put on two shows, firstly in February in the very early days of COVID-19, and then in May after Korea had flattened the curve. All of the productions have been either cancelled or postponed so far, and some have been replaced by online performances. Our education programs too have gone online, and we now offer on-tech classes. Since the NTOK is a public institute relying on state subsidies, we must abide by the government's preventive measures against coronavirus, perhaps more strictly than those in the private sector. So inevitably, we've had to persuade our guest artists to comply with a different set of guidelines compared to the private sector, and that has not been easy. We try to minimize the financial impact that artists may suffer in case of cancellation, postponement, or transition to an online platform. So we try to minimize the financial impact on the artists that we work with. At the same time, we take into consideration the significant inconvenience that frequent cancellations may cause our audience. Since on-stage performances are no longer possible, we've made the most of online live broadcasts. For example, one of our main music programs, Yo Rock Festival, took place this year entirely through online live streaming, which allowed the participating artists to perform as they had planned. Also, 6 of our most popular in-house productions by our resident companies have been streamed online. Although our audience cannot be present in the theatre, although we cannot have live audience, they've welcomed the opportunity to enjoy our performances online. In addition, we have introduced support programs for artists and creatives in the private sector who suffered the impact of COVID-19. Through an open call, 15 projects in the fields of Changguk, traditional Korean opera, dance, and traditional Korean music have been selected to receive our funding, and we are looking to stage them in the future.
Looking ahead, the post-pandemic era, NTOK is also developing some projects to complement the in-person performances. One of those projects is bringing stage shows to screens, which we are focusing on right now, starting this season. This will help satiate the audience who want culture and art contents without having to encounter personal contact. We already secured enough budget for this project next year, and we're trying to figure out how to best produce these screen versions. To create an ecosystem that protects the rights of individual artists and promotes co-prosperity, we went through an extensive consultation from the very beginning stage of the project through the advisory committee consisting of professionals from legal, art, video production, and distribution arenas. I'd like to emphasize that screening a show is only an alternative to in-person performance due to the non-contact requirement today, and that this project will be possible only when the actual show is staged. The sense of presence of a live show, a liveness delivered by an in-person performance is quintessential to a theater. That is why I don't think it's appropriate to pursue this screening option, such as streaming on contact platforms, to completely replace in-person performances. Stages are not studios. If the performing arts industry starts to shift heavily toward this direction, we will end up reducing the scope of our intrinsic role and our way of communication. Thanks to the public funding, we are relatively stable in terms of financing in comparison to private organizations. So I feel that it is our duty to find ways to continue staging in-person performances and ensure a safe environment so audience will come back in the time of post-COVID. I believe that's our top priority. NTOK is, of course, developing a variety of counter-COVID measures, but these measures must never affect the essence of performing arts. While coming up with the ways that we can do during this difficult time, we have a strong will to continue producing quality shows based on our stable finance and outstanding resident companies, and we're striving to present those to our audience. Neglecting culture and art means isolating our own humanity. So I feel that it is our responsibility as a government institution to maintain the role of culture and art that resonate and preserve the beautiful human heart through the strong solidarity among international cultural institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. I think you're raising some very important points, particularly about the essence of performing arts and what it means to be supporting the continuity of arts in this very, very difficult situation we face. I think it's also interesting to note that the move to live streaming is seen really as a stopgap measure. It's not a replacement. And I feel that resonates very, very much with what the West Kowloon attitude is. We're also using live streaming. We're also trying to use digital, but we will absolutely not replace the experience, the visceral experience of being in a theater and seeing a live performance. I think very important message for us to get across. Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to perhaps the other extreme, from government-funded to the private sector now, and introduce Alice Feldman, Development Manager of Music Works International and Creative Director of Pangaea Jetlag Festival. This is the largest festival of Russian, Slavic, Balkan, and other East European musics, but in North America, which cannot be an easy sell at times. Alice is an entrepreneur, innovator, and in bringing the culture of active volunteerism to special events and projects that are interactive, collaborative, and uniquely participatory experiences for people of all ages. Alice, that's quite a CV you've got there. I look forward to hearing from you. So please unmute yourself.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hello? Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation, the opportunity to participate in this panel. It's a deep honor and a thrill to be coming to you from across the sea. So I'd like to speak today about two specific projects that that my organizations have undertaken and as a response to COVID-19 in the past 6 months. So I am one of the creative directors of Jetlag, which is a multicultural and intergenerational 3-day outdoor annual music and arts and heritage festival in the Catskills, not too far from Woodstock. We have quite a few children and adults and just a lot of generations at the festival. So this year we realized very quickly that to maintain the integrity of the mission of our festival, which is to present contemporary trends in Russian and Slavic and Jewish diasporic culture to North America, it's integral to our mission to actually have performers from overseas, from Russia and from Eastern Europe, present in North America. And we realized that very early on that we wouldn't be able to achieve that this year in person. We also realized that we don't have the capacity to produce an online virtual festival. We're an almost entirely volunteer-run festival, and we have been for the past 13 years. We receive a minority amount of funding from less than 15% from the New York State Foundation for the Arts, and the rest of the money is through private sponsors and ticket sales. And we just realized that we wouldn't have the possibility of going virtual. We just didn't have the technical capacity to do that. And so we partnered with a sister festival in Russia that has a very similar mission to us and a similar kind of cultural lineup called Platform. And they're also volunteer run and grassroots. And together we produce, and they had, a team of amazing Russian engineers and computer technicians. And we produced a 2-day long, 24-hour music event with 12 stages running simultaneously for our audiences and for the audiences of the other 10 participating cultural groups, music-minded production groups. And it was like really quite the feat to pull off. It was like quite a lot. And the experience to the audience really was one as similar as it could have been to being at a festival and having a multitude of different experiences to choose from. So we produced and curated a stage at this online festival that featured performers from, I think, 6 or 7 different countries, a lot of different languages, and it was a really, really inspiring and amazing experience for all of us to see that cultural partnerships, cross-cultural exchange is really possible in this new normal. We wouldn't have been able to give our audiences any kind of new content if it wasn't for this partnership with Platforma. So it was just it really paved the way for seeing how to see this situation as opening the door to opportunities. So that's one project. And the other project that emerged as a direct response to COVID was one that we undertook with MusicWorks International and our association that we co-founded in South Africa, which is called Cultural Connections Africa. And it is an association of music industry professionals around the African continent. There's about 40 people in Cultural Connections Africa that range from music promoters to arts administrators across the continent. And together, we, the members compiled a roster of 30 different African musicians that they're affiliated with across the continent. And this roster, we created like a matchmaking program with different arts organizations around the world to give to them original music from across the African continent for them to then broadcast and stream to their constituents. So we partnered with a couple of different festivals, a couple of different, in Europe, in the UK, in North America. Our primary partner is Colors of Ostrava in Czechoslovakia, and we're now entering into our second season of streaming. And the model that we currently have is it's all donation based. We encourage viewers to send donations, and then those donations are collected through our US-based nonprofit partner, giving a tax incentive to people to donate. And then the donations are split between the artists, the production company that we partner with in South Africa, and to CCA. And the purpose of this initiative isn't to provide income to these artists, it's to allow them to have a broader reach and expand their audience markets to places that they have prior to this opportunity not had a chance to expand to. And our hope is that with this initiative, when they have a chance to tour again, they'll have a new market to come into. and to perhaps go into and perform. So yeah, and we're currently programming the second season, and there's no cost to the promoters to participate. It's just great content that you get to, great world music that you get to give to your audiences. So yeah, so that's, and both of these initiatives are really, they cultivate a lot of enthusiasm. You know, there's just a lot of ripe opportunity for cross-cultural exchange and for helping one another, for getting music out to the world. And I'm feeling a lot of just, I don't know, open generosity, like Claire was talking about, how at this moment it's more important now than ever to be generous with our ideas and with our resources, because we can do more with that. So yeah, thank you for for listening.
Thank you very much, Alice. You're opening up a very different perspective of, perhaps I can call it an entrepreneurial approach to dealing with the situation, and giving people an opportunity, as you say, to open up new horizons and open up new markets in a way that I think is going to be more important. Really, Claire made this point as well. We rely on our traditional approach up to the point where it is no longer relevant. And I think we now are at that point where we need to reconsider. And what you're doing, I think, is showing a very interesting way forward. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to move on now to a contributor from Thailand, Mr. Lasit Isaranggura. I'll call him Lasit if he doesn't mind. He's musical director and performing arts project manager, and is working among Thailand's top musicians and artists in the Ministry of Culture of Thailand. He has expertise in international performing arts projects, and is recognized as one of Thailand's main resource persons in terms of international artistic cooperation and coordination. His international projects include Corn, a mass dance performance at the world's top venues, such as the Sydney Opera House and the Royal Albert Hall. As well, he is currently the director of the Office of Performing Arts under the Fine Arts Department of the Minister of Culture of Thailand. Lasit, please unmute yourself, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. For the updates, can you hear me? All right. Okay. For the update of the situation, we have successfully reopened the theaters for the trial now. It's okay. Everything went well. So we expected to have a full program next in this end of this month. We expected a full house because we only have 300 right now for the new regulation, so it shouldn't be difficult to fill out the seat. Okay, this is my presentation. Well, since Thai economy was majorly driven by tourism, which had its peak right before the occurrence of the pandemic, the Thai creative industry and arts has been dependent and integrated into tourism and hospitality industry. Art and culture facilities such as museums, theaters, cinemas, and architecture, craft and art market flourished, particularly because of the boom of tourism. However, tourism had now suffered most. The government project that it might take at least 3 to 4 years for the Thai tourism to get back to where it has been before the pandemic. With this glooming economy trajectory, artists, both established and local ones, have a high possibility of converting into other professionals. This means the irreversible loss of artist skill. This has become more visually noticeable over the course of 6 months. And therefore, the government is now putting an urgent effort to maintain the dynamic of the art scene in Thailand. For example, a lot of commission have been placed on the preservation of folk arts, especially the performances and artist expression. For the contemporary art communities, there has been a governmental effort to host competition, a direct commission of works, set up both virtual and physical markets for art products, and promote the digitalization of the distribution of art through various medias. In terms of reviving the art dynamic, the government upcoming financial plan has included a big lump budget for art and its outlet as a tool for the resilience of local community across the country. However, the priority of the budgetary provision are speculated upon performing art, musical performance, um, the cultural festival. This is part of government economic stimulus plan that is supposed to start on this coming budget year. We haven't seen the money yet, so we don't really know which project will have the money, which is not. The governmental authority responsible for art and creative industry in Thailand has shifted its focus toward the direction of digital distribution. We have now undergone a major upgrade on the art database and platform of virtual access to art consumption. For instance, the online broadcast of performances, concerts, and capacity building sessions for art professionals, virtual tour and digital archive for museums and films, and online art market and auction. The Ministry of Commerce had recently announced a plan to change the structure of Thailand artistic production, especially film and content, from domestic consumption to more export-oriented production, especially the consumption viable on digital platform. Well, but looking on the bright side of this story, there has been an urgent initiative to establish certain of like-minded artists in the same or related field of art to cast their voices onto governmental measures and support for the easing of the effects of the COVID-19 on the art community across the countries. And to respond to such need of being heard and participatory, the Ministry of Culture had never been more active in taking in their share of idea, solution, and forecast of the future of art in Thailand. There has been a wider space for public participation in the process of art and culture related policy making, including monitoring the efficiency of the implementation. Well, it could be said that COVID-19 has brought the people in both governmental and non-governmental sector closer to overcome the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I think the key thing that comes out again, it's reinforcing this message of, involvement, community involvement, both the government working obviously in its important role of leading funding, in this case through the economic stimulus plans, but also engaging the artists to come up with solutions. Very, very important. What we're doing is really all about the artists. I think the outcome will be better if they're engaged. And it's very, very reassuring to see that the Thai government also recognizes the importance of that engagement. So I think from the point of view of the contribution, it's also very clear that an economy that relies on tourism, and let's be honest, I think many of us increasingly rely on tourism, have got to engage all the sectors that contribute to that. And it's very clear that Thailand has mobilized the resources that need to sort of develop that reaction, that response. So thank you very much, Lassit. So finally, in terms of the formal introductions, I'd like to introduce the final speaker on our list. That's Vilma Dukerte from Dubai. She's the director of Al Sakal Avenue, and in fact hosted a very enjoyable event there. I think about a year, feels like 10 years ago now, but not so long ago. Vilma has been in the creative industries around the world: New York, Chicago, London, and of course now Dubai. Joining Al Sakal in 2012, she's been instrumental in its evolution and development. Indeed, the physical expansion of that facility. The focus particularly on growing the creative economy, looking at homegrown cultural paradigms in what they call the global south. Most important, I think, is that she brings to the table an awareness of the non-profit activities in the arts, which are obviously fundamental to the Al Sakal Arts Foundation set up in 2019. I'd also like to congratulate her on her recent award of the master's degree. So I think we have a very, very important contributor. So Vilma, all over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Douglas, for your kind introduction. I hope you'll be able to return to Dubai and visit us again soon. I'm not sure if it's a blessing or in ways great responsibility to be presenting last in this discussion after listening to all my colleagues here. I wondered if I may actually expand our question a little bit beyond business models, whether we can dislocate that from the question and attempt to liberate culture from economic and neoliberal expectation as part of our discussion and venture a bit more in our ideology and moral reevaluation and recalibration of what culture or an art institution should do or be. I think we all, just like all of you, entered this period of continuous remaking, and it felt that we were faced with eventualities that really had no map. I think contextualizing who we are as Al Sakal and the context of the city of Dubai, we've already, I mean, when we began, I think the West did not know what to do with us. We did not fit any of the traditional paradigms. And as a homegrown institution, we were acting as a neighborhood, because we're really composed of 80 polyphonic, homegrown pioneers that are active in arts and culture, literature, performing arts, and theater. But then we're also a content producer that produces more than 500 events that are open and free for our public. And we're also an arts foundation that acts in not-for-profit capacity. So that kind of self-sustaining hybrid model that is relevant to Dubai. I think in ways viewing ourselves...
Vilma, just briefly, can I interrupt you? Sorry. Can I ask everybody to turn off their mics, because there's quite a lot of feedback. I think perhaps Mr. Kim may have left his mic on. I noticed that one.
Or Pallavi Sharma, I think.
Yeah, there's a few people with mics on. So if you could please mute your mics, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Vilma, I apologize, but it's very difficult to hear you.
Okay, I hope you were able to hear the beginning of it. But I think viewing ourselves as a process, but also as a product, and then a producer and new producer, enabled us to recast our models quite swiftly. And I could relate to quite a few points made by Claire at the beginning, and then also by Alice as well. I think that kind of immediate and agile response that was necessary. But I think at times when there is no certainty, for us, our values and our mission really acted as a compass that guided us throughout. As a community of creatives, I mean, we immediately came together, and that aspect of communication was really important. But I think while we all made attempts to go digital, and found new opportunities in that area, which I will touch upon just a little later. I think what was really important is that we felt closing our doors would not suffice. We felt we had to do something more. And I think we resorted to that civic role and civic duty where we transcended those borders of culture or cultural space, and we became a space for need. So even our food concepts that were kind of luxury restaurants that form part of our district became community kitchens. And we were able to produce 20,000 meals for the needy around us. So you've witnessed the artists and galleries in our community donating proceeds of works in order to collect those funds and to give back to vulnerable communities around us. And then concepts that are in fashion or design got together and produced more than 6,000 masks that we've given away. We as El Cercal also issued a relief program of 3 months leasing subsidy, which was conditional to giving back. And so that kind of collectivity really amplified and grew and took us to areas we didn't expect and we had no idea will lead us to that. As a community, we created more than $1 million worth of barter economy amongst each other. So we started sharing our services and expertise and products at no cost in order to sustain each other. So that kind of focus on systems became key to our survival and our response and in ways that we engaged with each other, but also with our audiences. And so I think it really challenged that connectivity and coming together, how virtual space enabled us to do so. And I think Delanti, who's done a lot of work in theory about community, is the one that said that, you know, experiencing community online is not necessarily reductive. It just takes a different form because all communities in one way or the other are imagined. And so I think we really got to experience that in times of COVID. And I think as I kind of maybe close this opening, some of the, I think, key learnings for us was this really recalibrating feedback circuits, right? Not speaking for, but with our community, with our artist network, with our members of our own district. And whether we are undergoing productive crisis, because it seemed a lot of us were touching upon the new opportunities that we were posed. But I think also some of the aspects, I think that Claire mentioned, that are pre-COVID issues that we must address. And so I think for us, it was focusing on economies of repair, rethinking our own responsibility when it comes to sustainability policy and some of the, I think, projects that I wish we initiated earlier that's now really become our priority. We've already been open as El Cercal since June, and it was really interesting to kind of revisit and go through this process of return while we keep our audiences safe. And there were some new opportunities that I didn't expect will happen. We were wondering how will our audiences react, and they actually been extremely passionate and excited to return. People couldn't wait to come back to the physical realm. And I think, well, there's been a lot of discussion that digital is a new form of existence. Actually, it felt that it was reaffirmation of the importance of brick and mortar, how we experience objects, but most importantly, how we experience each other within the space of arts and culture. That kind of aspect of public good and us coming together, I think, remains very important. By being very active online, we reach completely new audiences that we monetized upon returns. In my conversations with some of our founders and owners of businesses and organizations, they said completely new people came back. In some cases, it's due to the fact that their competition closed by now. In some cases, it's due that they reached completely new audiences online that engaged with them and now came back in the physical realm, and they were able to actually monetize that engagement. And so I think for us, yes, it's economies of repairs, it's rethinking our budget to have a certain percentage that's allocated to giving back as part of our long-term model going forward, and really learning from this period of uncertainty, and thinking how can we shift from wholesale thinking into whole thinking structures. I think is really important for us as arts and culture entities. So maybe I'll close there just so we can maybe move into some questions and discussion.
Thank you very much. I think you've hit a lot of the key issues that we're all facing. I think particularly the one that resonates with us is the civic role. You know, I agree with you absolutely, and I'm absolutely so impressed with this flexibility to move your restaurants to become community kitchens, this whole idea of giving back, as you say. And I also picked up particularly this idea that digital doesn't replace the bricks and mortar, but what it does is opens up new audiences that perhaps in future can then become part of your audience in the theatres and in the bricks and mortar buildings. Of course, that has to be the way, because I think we're all struggling with this notion of how do you justify the investment in digital at a time when it's really no other stream of income. You have to sort of look at it as a long-term investment, not an immediate one. Absolutely right. And, you know, looking at it from the West Kowloon perspective, we're struggling with exactly those issues. How do we sustain the artists that are not being paid? How do we work with them, looking beyond the end of this particular challenge to what happens next? And I think we're all going to have to accept that what happens next is not what happened before. You know, the point that Claire made about, you know, let's reconsider the paradigm, and let's try and make sure that we really are agile, reflecting what's necessary now. We've got roughly about an hour left. We have a few questions that have come in, but I'm going to start with a few questions that Alison and her team have put together for me, because I think they raised some of those questions that we've been touching on today. And perhaps I can start with you, Vilma, since you're the most recent one.
Sure.
You talked about the challenges in terms of this recalibration. I love that term. But in terms of your partnerships with local artists and community groups, how would you characterize this as different to what you might have done before this COVID situation? What is it that you feel has really been an opportunity here that perhaps wouldn't have arisen before?
Well, I think one of the aspects, and even going back to Claire's opening, I think one thing I loved is that she touched upon the fact of working with the government. Sometimes private and public sector tends to create their own objectives and their own mission, and somehow we end up working for two different things. And I think merging those efforts, that kind of cognitive generosity, but then generosity beyond that in terms of our ideas, our resource, and working for the same purpose was really essential. And the same happened here. I mean, we always had close connections to the government, but we really worked collectively with our institutions around us, which I think was important, because when times are good, everyone is so busy with what they need to do. And I think we never find that time to actually come together. One of the key learnings, something that I said about recalibrating feedback circuits, I meant that as a community, when you manage 80 organization owners of different organizations as part of your community, again, time availability becomes difficult. This kind of ability to form unconventional collaborations, to cross those boundaries of a certain sector or a discipline could be quite challenging. And we were able to do that in a very kind of accelerated format in times of crisis. And so I think now the way we plan has changed. Just recently with events that happened in Lebanon, then we felt very connected as institutions based in Dubai, because we actually represent and work with so many artists and creatives and people that we know that are based out of Lebanon. And so within 2 days, we got together as a community. We said we have to do something. And we were able to turn around a new project to give back, where we raised proceeds. Anything that we earned on that one day, we would donate and we would match as Al Sirkal. And we were able to raise $200,000 almost in one day, and that happened within 5 business days. I think the kind of ambitions we set out for ourselves now and the timelines are something that we would have never done before. We probably would have said we need at least 1 month or 3 months. And today it's like we can do that in days. It is possible. And I think for me, the key learning was that I don't have to have all the answers. But if I bring people together, collectively we are able to form those new patterns and those new ways of response. And politically reimagine, but maybe even beyond that, reimagine ways that we can cross our myopic visions and some of these myopic paradigms that in ways we helped create. So breaking away those silos.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I love this notion of corrective surgery for myopic paradigms. I think we all need that, that's for sure.
Amen.
I've got a couple of questions here, which I will throw into the mix. The first question I've had, I'm not sure who this is from, is it's now 6 to 9 months into COVID, slightly longer in some cases, with no end in sight. What is the one thing that, working with these changes that you've all shared, that you will keep going as COVID continues? Or are you still seeing things changing day to day? Perhaps I can throw this at Lassit. Would you like to comment on this one? What is it that you've picked up that you want to continue?
Oh, sure. During the lockdown, I tried to keep my artists busy. So let them gathering together in a small group to came up with the idea. And we came up with a YouTube channel about the theater and the artists. They bring their own camera and they have to meet in a small group. So it came up with something like a recital. Some making their own documentary, and some became a host show for the musician and artists for the theater. The channel was surprisingly very well received. However, we cannot sell the ticket after for that. After we open the theater, they have to go back to practice. So they have to stop it because it's going to be too hard for them to heavy load for them. But I would think that if I have a budget for the production, so they don't have to do the production themselves, not to be a cameraman themselves, we can continue the channel to add our fan base. We have a lot of newcomers to watch the channel and really want to go to the theaters.
Excellent. Love that idea. Alice, perhaps you might also like to comment on this question.
Sure, about what changes we'll be carrying forward?
Yes.
So, well, I think definitely in the next iteration of the festival, we would love to continue doing a part of some sort of virtual programming and a cultural partnership with this festival in Russia, so that we can share our cultural content with them. You know, we have incredible first generation, second generation Russian heritage speakers and performers here in the States that are doing great heritage work, and it was really well received in Russia, the work that they're doing. So definitely, regardless of to what extent we're able to do a physical programming, I'm sure that we would love to continue doing some sort of festival streaming content exchange with with the Russian festival we partnered with. And then also the overwhelming support from our audience makes me believe that we will be able to do a ticketed paywall for the festival in June if we need to go fully virtual again. This like demonstration, this demo period was really just really well received, and it gave us more just the enthusiasm from our audiences, from our multiple audiences, makes me think that that would be possible. And then also, I think that there's been a lot of there's been some demand from our audience for programming initiatives for youth, for children, that were always very involved in the festival. Just, you know, they miss it. And we miss the involvement with children and with teenagers. And I think that we're going to look forward to coming up with some very innovative way to have some sort of online programming for them, some sort of skills training for youth in music production or something. I don't know. I can definitely, what's been coming through very strongly is just how needed all of this is. And yeah, that's what we'll be carrying forward. Mm-hmm.
I think particularly on programs for younger people. I mean, in Hong Kong, we have the imminent return to school, but for the last few months and the end of the last semester, children were learning online. And I can tell because my daughter-in-law, and my wife are all teachers. They're always looking out for good quality content for supplementary teaching materials, that sort of thing. So I think you're heading in the right direction with looking at how that can be done. I'm sure there's great demand for that. Another question that's come in, which I think is also very interesting. What issues have been pushed to the surface that maybe would not have been addressed if we continued working as normal? I mean, Claire cited an example about casual workers, and their contracts needed to be looked at to provide a more secure working environment. Are there any other issues like that COVID has forced institutions or organizations to look at and perhaps address finally, perhaps would not have been addressed otherwise? Let's start with Claire, and then perhaps Mr. Kim would also like to comment after that. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, well, I won't speak again to the casual contracts, but that's something clearly that needs to be addressed. This one is probably a little bit controversial, and I don't know how commonly held this view is, but certainly in Australia, I think we have to look to our governance models. You know, I think many arts organisations, my own included, were, you know, forced to a point of almost having to trade insolvent. And I think, you know, whilst you can't blame that on board so much, I think so much time and energy gets invested into good governance practice. And yet, actually, when it came down to it, how much difference did that make? You know, I think certainly for my own team, the number who are involved in, you know, risk management and asset assessments and reporting, and actually at the end of the day, it didn't provide any assurance. It didn't provide any security to many organisations. So I think, you know, I think governance is something that we need to step back and have a look at. Maybe when things have settled a bit. I can see Douglas smiling away in the background there. But yeah, I think governance failed.
Interesting. I can say, and I hope I'm not going to be broadcast too widely beyond these four walls, but I sympathise immensely with that issue. We seem to be facing more governance, more challenging restrictions, more issues that frankly don't help us to survive. And I hear exactly what you're saying. Don't get me started. Mr. Kim, perhaps you might also like to comment on this one. Mr. Kim perhaps needs to unmute again.
Yeah. The translator unmuted.
So we are entirely state funded, so we are quite stable when it comes to financial resources. So we haven't quite had any economic struggles. But also, at the same time, the impact of coronavirus has had its toll on our productions, on our programs. So many of our productions have been cancelled or postponed. So our freelance artists have not been able to enjoy financial security. They have actually been struggling quite a lot in terms of how they will go on to make a living. So I think we must provide emergency funding to make sure they survive these difficult times. And also at the same time, we must provide a new platform for them to sustain their creative practice. Perhaps we could pre-buy some projects and look to stage them in the future so that the immediate funding can go to struggling artists who can then survive these difficult times. So in order to retain a sustainable artistic ecosystem, it is important to retain that ecosystem to make sure that our artists continue their artistic practice. So our stance is very much that we try to walk hand in hand with our community of artists and creatives. So when we've learned actually new lessons through our new approaches. The online streamings have garnered very enthusiastic responses from our viewers, audiences. So we've had an unprecedented number of views for our online streaming services. So I think this may well be a very important new platform of communication that we can utilize in the future in our relationship with our audiences or in the way that we engage with our audience. Also in terms of our distribution channels and production method. That's it from me.
Thank you very much. It's obvious that we're all having to sort of deal with this issue of digital and what it means now, but also how it can be maintained and developed in the future. I think this is going to be very important to us. A related question, actually, Mr. Kim, which I think perhaps you're in a good position to comment on, is that there seems to be some concern that as governments get more stretched, as the crisis goes on and the challenges from different sectors grow, is it going to be realistic to expect that government funding can continue? At some stage, this is an issue, but perhaps Lasset might also comment on this one, because we all know that ultimately the final resolve has to be from what government's intentions are. But can we realistically look to this in the long term? Mr. Kim, perhaps you might comment, and then I'll ask Lasset and other guests to comment.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, and then the end is not in our sight, as you know, and nobody knows how it's going to unfold. So it's impossible for us to come up with a long-term plan. And right now, it's hard to commission any shows right now. So we have to make sure that some support need to go to our community of artists, and then all the shows and performing arts that involve our theater need to continue. I don't know when, but we have the budget that covers production as well as the crew and all the artists. So I feel that the fund that we receive is something that we share with them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lasseth, would you like to comment on this one as well?
Okay. There has been divided into cases. For the government agency like mine, we still have the enough budget to continue our performance. But for any private sector, we have to wait and see for what it's called a financial stimulated plan that supposed to be include the art and festival into it. So, but we don't know exactly how much we're going to have in terms of the stimulated plans. But in a long term, we used to discuss about strengthen a legal tools to help the foundation, to strengthen the so they can have the right to ask for the supported money for the government. It's like a developing the law. We have a discussion about promoting an inbound investment in field of art and creativity, including inbound travel of art professional, film crew, and exhibition promoter. But that was before the pandemics.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I think all governments are going to be facing resource constraints, and how they share that out will be, I guess, reflective of the priority given to arts and culture. Some we've seen in Europe, particularly, their understanding of how important art and culture is for the economy and jobs, etc. Likewise, we heard earlier from Claire that governments in Australia seem to also have got it. Unfortunately, it's not the same everywhere. I suspect this is a challenge. A different question then, and it goes back to Claire, but I think anybody could contribute on this one, about wellness. What, as leaders of institutions, how are you addressing staff morale during this time? Perhaps we'll start with Claire, and then Vilma might also comment on this one, because I think she touched on it briefly in her comment. So Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. Look, we, right from the beginning, sort of wanted to do the right thing by our people, and 6 months in, that hasn't changed. So we sort of just, I don't know, just tried to keep it really simple and not overthink it. So communication, we found, is really critical. And it sounds like such a small thing, but when people don't hear anything other than the sort of the news from the government for a long time, they can get quite stressed about what that means. So at the beginning, we were communicating with the team every day, which was pretty intense. But, you know, new information was coming to hand at moment to moment. So we made a commitment right at the beginning that we would share information and insights as soon as they became available, and to be really honest. So to not, to not dilute the message, to not try and hide bad news, but to always be honest and transparent. And that's something we're still living by. So we're not communicating every day now. We're down to twice a week written comms, and then we do once a week an interactive broadcast, so people have the opportunity to ask questions, and we've committed to do that for as long as we're working remotely. So I think sometimes communication gets overlooked because it's such a simple thing, but actually the feedback that we've had from our team is that we can't communicate too much, and they want to hear from me, but they also want to hear from their immediate managers and from their colleagues as to how they're going. So having, we implemented Microsoft Teams just actually like this time last year, so we had it in place pre the pandemic, but that's been invaluable for people being able to stay connected with each other individually as well as en masse. The other things we did was really sort of think deeply about our values as an organisation and what does that mean during this time. And one of our values is care more. So we really sort of stopped to think, well, how could we look after people at this time and give them access to resources that would really help them on a day-to-day basis. And part of that has been about access to psychologists and financial counselling for individuals as well as their families, but also providing, providing wellbeing resources about how to work from home and how to stay connected and how to plan for the future during this time of uncertainty. So a lot of kind of really practical things. But I think the key to it really has been the communication, and it's one of the things I think, as I said, that gets overlooked when it's actually quite you have to make a commitment to do it, but once you do that, it has an enormous impact.
Thank you, Claire. I absolutely, support what you're saying. I mean, we've had a series of issues, not just about COVID, but prior to that, the demonstrations. Indeed, a couple of our staff were arrested over the weekend with getting involved in a demonstration. And the practical support that you can give to help them to deal with and process that experience, it's invaluable. It really is. You can't underestimate just the fact that they know that there's something behind them that gives them the confidence to go on and keep working. So important. Vilma, do you want to contribute on this one?
Sure. I mean, I think to start with, we all must recognize that we are not doing enough. I think it's still one of the areas that always gets overlooked. I mean, I think similarly to what Claire mentioned, I think at the beginning we also were personally in touch with our team. I would make calls. We would get certain experts to share 1 hour of their expertise in various areas. But I think in terms of as we kind of move forward or we consider what that kind of new way of thinking or living is. I mean, when we came back to the physical space, we still work 50% from home and 50% from our offices. I realized that there was paralysis of thinking almost in terms of COVID. So in order for us to begin producing and actually move past that, we had to really almost discard that or leave it at the door. In order to rebuild, in order to focus on economies of repair, and give certain assurance to everyone about their place in this organization, which we done so from the very beginning. I had to look at our financials as well. We had to undergo salary cuts, but the idea was that we save each other collectively. So that was really important, and that sensitivity. I think understanding everyone's is faced a very different personal position. And so certainly it's something that will be ongoing, I think, as we move forward. But hopefully this current situation will enable us to maybe reevaluate or rethink our measures of success and our intent as organizations as a whole, as we reimagine our models. I think is for the future, because that's really key. Where we receive funding, what are the expectations from us? And I think that was one of the disappointing aspects where it's how we all respond, because some of the key big institutions that in the West that have received enormous funding still ended up discarding their staff and researchers and artists and really key members of those institutions that play a vital role in production. And that kind of fear can enable that paralysis elsewhere in terms of thinking, am I next, or asking all those questions. So I think that's something is really important for us to consider, that fragility of a cultural worker and the rights and protection that is essential, because it's how we build sustainability. But I do want to bring back a little bit our relationship with ecology for institutions. I really hope that we are able to transition from that step of when we stage shows about Anthropocene, that we finally begin to act and measure our own output and be critics of ourselves, which is something we are beginning to do as El Cercal too. I feel we kind of are also a bit late in that area. It's something we began to measure but didn't act enough, I believe.
Thank you so much. I think this particular point about it, trying to give assurance to people about their situation, very difficult but so important. The feedback I get from my colleagues and staff is that the fact that we've made it very clear that nobody's going to be let go, that we're continuing to program, even working from home. It's meant that the organization has, I think, been stable throughout. But we've had to do things like cutting salaries, but we've communicated that and let people know why we've done it without trying to affect people. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from. There's a couple more questions come in. Let me start with one for Alice. This question is, you are a more independent entrepreneur. What would your advice be to larger institutions for how they can monetize their digital content? Boy, if you could answer this one, I think everybody will be happy with that.
If I had the answer to that, I would be monetizing it. I'm kidding.
You're telling me you wouldn't be on with us, that's for sure.
I'm just kidding. I think that it's really important to understand that audiences crave an individual personalized experience with performers and with artists, and just in general to really feel that like individual attention. And I think that the more that artists are able to provide that to their audiences in really innovative and creative ways, right? Not just through performance, but like really committing to connecting with an audience on an individual level. So like, and you see this with artists before COVID that were using Patreon to produce like exclusive content for their fans, to have special, performances for fans only, or I know like certain artists that will, write. I work with jazz musicians too. We have artists that will write like a little piece of music, just like one staff line long, and send it to their like top fans and things like that. And it's like not as a way to like to capitalize on their fandom, but it's like really like committing to like to knowing your audiences and to wanting to give them exclusive content. So I think that the more like we as arts organizations are able to promote those opportunities to our artists, to support them in their endeavors to build out their audiences and to really know them and to create these opportunities for them to workshop their art, their artistry. The more like localized and intimate we can make experiences for artists to individuals, I think that might be that's where I can see money happening.
I have a follow-up question from Catherine Tan. She says, do you think the audience will pay the same amount of money for an online program as they might for a ticket to a theatrical or festival performance?
I think definitely not at first. I think right now there's a content bloat happening in our like online virtual market where people have gotten very accustomed to free content on social media, on Facebook and to Instagram, and already there's a hurdle that we need to jump in order to justify why a well-produced show should cost anything at all, right? If you can get it on YouTube, and I think that the justification is in the like one-of-a-kind intimate personal experience, however that may come, whether if it's a question and answer with the artist immediately following the show, or if it's a chance to, like here, like in a chat room, ask questions. If there's an opportunity to do something beyond just performing, that's what people look for in live performances, and that's why they pay money for them, because they're feeling like really connected to the content. So I think that I also think that, you know, honesty goes a long way. I think we have a tradition, or we have a practice in cultural arts organizations to not disclose, right? Or just in organizations in general, our finances to our audiences. Like, our audiences don't exactly know that artist fees are that the fees that artists receive are often, in many genres and in many disciplines, like not enough to sustain their lifestyles. To sustain lifestyles, it's not sustainable just living on artist fees alone. That's why so few artists are able to tour, like more than just regionally. And I think that being disclosive about why things cost money and why we're asking for people to pay for certain experiences, I think that builds trust with your community and with your audience. And I think people are more willing to invest in something, to invest in an organization and their content when they understand where that money is going to and why it's needed. So that's what I think.
Duncan, do you mind if I jump in?
Sure, of course.
Just like to add a couple points that Alice touched upon, and I thought it was quite interesting, because I think there was a point where I felt there was also online fatigue that set in. There was, you know, it was accelerated at the beginning, and then later I think audiences just got overwhelmed. But you asked the right question, Alice. It made me think about the importance of digital commons. So not only physical realm, but what is digital commons? What is it going to look like? And whether COVID crisis enabled some of that remapping that began. And one of the key learnings I had, so when we were allowed to host events again, so in August we launched concert program every Monday, and we were live streaming it, and at the same time we were selling ticketed performances within the physical space. And it was interesting because obviously socially distant, we couldn't accommodate that many people, but everyone was willing to pay for the physical performance, and it was fully sold out. And online was streamed for free. And we were able to just reach different audiences at the same time. So if we had 100 people seated in the audience, we were reaching another few hundred online. And I think that duality of offline and online is something that is here to stay. And we are going to manage that through technological capacity, but also marketing capacity and how we engage. That's an expectation of our audience. I think that unlearning cannot occur after COVID. I think audience is expected to be in both spaces.
Thank you, Velma, and thank you, Alice. I think both of you made an important point. The first being, quite frankly, people need to value the artist, and you know, that's a big issue in many places. People take artists for granted, particularly in places where the artist is in some ways supported by the state or by, you know, subsidy of some description. To give honesty about, you know, the value of the artist, I think is going to be critical to this. But it's not going to be easy, is it? You know, there are so many issues that come into play when it comes to income, it comes to explaining the overheads and costs involved with the production, etc. I think it's a very difficult challenge, this one. I really do. And to Vilma's point, I think there is going to be a distinction made in many people's minds because of the nature of the internet. You know, YouTube and Facebook and all of these things are considered to be free, and there's so much content. What you've got to offer is something more when it's a real live performance. And we've done this here within the district, where we, for a short while, were running live music in one of our venues when we couldn't have an audience, but we couldn't charge for it. But the people in the audience were paying for the privilege of food and drink and what have you, which was the added value. And I think that's the point. You've got to add value to the live performance as well as the online performance. Interesting. I mean, there's a whole area of conversation there I'm sure we could get into. There is another question here from Barbara Scales, and the question is, do you see potential in the development of video films on art as an art form itself to share with your audience in a future where halls are open, either to have these films in hall or available on screen at home? Can this be an enriching complement to live art performance as the audio recording of music has been for over 100 years? Good question. I mean, as we become a more visual, driven by what happens online, will the visual overtake the audio? Anyone like to comment on this one? No volunteers, so I'll ask, yes, Vilma.
I guess I don't have all the answers, but just one of the things that we did that I think also came through at this time was we are now all expected to be available. So a lot of our digital content is programmed, and it became very tiring for our audiences. We actually felt that precisely this kind of content is now having a comeback that has a long form and that is always available. So our response to crisis was elcercal.online, which now become our permanent lab, as we call it, and it's our time lab. So the idea is that we begin to streamline and have content available at any time for any audience in any time zone. I think that kind of messaging was essential, and we see this content to becoming very popular versus then kind of scheduled timings for something that I have to attend and I must be available for. So maybe that was just a thought.
Excellent. I mean, I think that's right. I mean, it comes back to the earlier question of what is it that's going to become part of everyday life now that wasn't perhaps there before. Maybe Lassig would also comment on this because of your initiative in YouTube, which again is another way of we touched on earlier about accessing to this content.
Well, I would think that the online content should be used to promoting the show, but interestingly, no matter how I try, taping or shooting the performance on stage can never capture the feelings of the live performance, which is contrasting to music. You can invest into recording in good quality music and people listen online and appreciate the quality of the sound, but not the live performance like dance and plays.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, people invest huge amounts of money in hi-fi systems to get that feeling of being in the concert hall, but very difficult to do when, just watching it on a flat screen. I agree with you. I think it's a different experience, but no less valid. I think there is a difference, Another question that's just come in, concerns about artists' copyright in respect of online performances, which are freely shared or downloaded. Tisa Ho has asked this interesting question. Perhaps Mr. Kim would like to comment on this because of some of the online projects that you mentioned.
Yes, Duncan. That is something that we're looking into right now. So far, I mean, we have not experienced such thing as going online before COVID-19. So now that and there is no fixed number of times that the performances can be downloaded or uploaded. So that is something that we need to consider. And for that, we have consulted with the artists and also lawyers, as well as the producers and administrators. And that committee are discussing in a very deep level right now, so that we can include an article in the contract about the copyright of ensuring 20% of the copyright fee to the artist. That is where we are right now. We have agreed upon this 20% fee when the performances go live, streamed online. And of course, in the time being, we're going to have to adjust that fee level a little bit, but right now it's 20%.
Okay, thank you. Very clear. Perhaps Alice might also comment on this from your perspective, because again, it's an area that you're clearly having to deal with.
Yeah, we encountered quite a lot of considerations about artist copyright laws and broadcasting rights when we were initially setting up the Sounds from Africa project, because we would have an artist based in Africa being presented by a presenter based in Europe, but being initially hosted by our American-based nonprofit. So three different countries of different broadcasting and streaming things. And we were able to be in touch with a pro bono lawyer from Tamizdat, which is an artist rights advocacy agency based in New York. And they were able to advise us on all of this. Basically, the artists in our project, we defer questions about artist streaming rights to the artist management, especially if they have a record label, because that really should be one of the remaining obligations of the label, should be probably to sort out those issues. If they have any things to do at all. And it's a very big legal gray zone right now. In general, you need to have a separate license if you plan to be archiving streams that are being broadcast. You need to have like an archival license for that, and you need to have separate licenses for streaming, but nobody seems to be checking very much. So it's a very much a gray zone, and I think it really is very dependent on the situation, on the context of the caliber and visibility of the artist, whose stream you're going to be broadcasting, where the recording is coming from, who owns the rights to it. So
interesting. I mean, it appears to me that this whole area is something that we're all going to have to address, particularly in terms of intellectual property rights for broadcasting, because it's not something that, unfortunately, I think people expect to see just once. Quite often, something is out there; it's out there permanently, and you know, unlike a performance in a theatre, which is ephemeral, and the whole experience is alive and visceral, as I said before, something that's recorded and promoted through YouTube or wherever, unfortunately, you can see it over and over again. You can spot the mistakes, you can spot the issues. And I think that there are a lot of issues there, not just around copyright, but around the artist's image and image management. So these are definitely issues we're going to have to address, I think. I don't have any more questions on my side.
There's one last comment.
There's one last comment just coming in.
WhatsApp.
Okay, I will check my, got it. I tell you, the technology we're deploying here is amazing. Okay. Sarah Lim from the Star Theatre in Singapore. She's just wondering if venues, thinking of venues, since mostly seem to be government funded, could they also be upfront and share with audiences why they should pay for online content in the same way that artists need to be paid as well? It's more of a statement, I think, which is about communications, transparency, and honesty. I think, I mean, it is a good point. The challenge for artists is that the institutions tend to get government funding rather than the artist, as I see it, and certainly that is generally the case around the world. I mean, for example, in Hong Kong, we do have government funding directly to artists, but again, it tends to be to the more established, the bigger artists, and inevitably some of the smaller artists, some of the more provocative artists have to survive on what they can pick up from performances. So it is very much a difficult issue, I think, for this communication, because government funding tends not to be necessarily the best type of funding for an artist to look for. There are so many rules, restrictions. They have to provide reports. They have to qualify. I mean, I'll give you an example. We recently, as the management of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, decided to make a donation as a COVID initiative. We decided to volunteer 10% of our salaries, and we put it into a fund to help small artists, local artists, to survive with small donations. I think the maximum was 300,000 Hong Kong dollars, which is less than 30,000 US. Mm-hmm. We had over 360 applicants for that, and we could only afford to fund about 11 or 12. But the beauty of that was we didn't have to put any of these restrictions and conditions. Basically, we said, give us a good project, deliver it, and you'll get paid, and we'll pay it up front. So the bureaucracy is reduced, and I think that's the issue with government funding. There's inevitable bureaucracy surrounding it. Lasse, perhaps you want to comment on this one.
Could you repeat again for the answer for your question?
Yeah, it wasn't really a question. It's more a sort of observation, which, you know, since government does fund a lot of the institutions, and you know how they might have a role in explaining to the world the value of online content. And you know, my view is that the online content is one thing, but the value of the artist is a different thing, really.
Yeah. Luckily we don't have this situation much in Thailand, because in terms of traditional arts, we don't have a copyright on it. It's traditional. We don't know who composed it or who invented it. So we only concerned about the right of the media, right, that we own. But in general term, we tend to give it to free in digital media. We don't have any policy about getting the money from it right now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm going to draw a line under where we are now today. Very, very interesting discussion, some very important points that have come out. I guess I would summarize it as we all have had to look at ourselves, how we operate, how we respond to the situation that we face. There have been some very important lessons about wellness, for example, as Claire said, and about looking after our colleagues and our community, the artists, the performance, and don't forget the audience. I mean, we mustn't forget that the reason we're constrained from reopening theatres is that it's about protecting them as much as anything. I think another role that's become very, very important, and Vilma raised this, was our civic responsibility to the wider community. And I gave an example just a few minutes ago about what we're doing in West Kowloon. Vilma gave some very good examples of what they're doing. I think we all have to accept that when our communities are challenged in such a dramatic way, we do have a responsibility to pay back for the support that we've had in the past. And that means recalibrating. It means looking again at what we've done, and perhaps more or less flexibly and more or less agile in responding to situations. Because I fear, and I hope I'm proved wrong, that this is unfortunately not going to be a one-off, that there will be other challenges to come in the future. We know that, for example, Thailand is facing these sort of demonstrations just as we did over the last year. These are challenges that are going to keep coming back, and we need to be adaptable. The question, of course, that we all want an answer to is, how do we monetize under this new paradigm? How do we extract the money? And Alice, I think, has given us one perhaps way of looking at that. I think that it's going to be something that we really do have to consider very carefully when we provide value. How do we provide value in a digital framework where at the moment we're constrained? But let's be honest, the digital cannot and must not replace the real, the live, that performance in the theatre, because that's what we all love. I believe I speak for everybody that's engaged in this session to say that the reason we do this is that we love that live performance. And the digital is great, but it cannot replace it. And I think that's very much came through from Mr. Kim's presentation. The essence of performance is what we should be aiming for, because that cannot at all be replaced. And finally, can I just say that, when we talk about the role of culture and art in society, I think it's important to bear in mind that from the earliest civilizations, culture and art, from the wall paintings and caves in France, through to the performances that we all know and love from tradition and the Thai tradition, the Japanese tradition, the Korean tradition, the Chinese traditions, they are wonderful and cannot be replaced. There's something to be treasured. And I hope that the experience of not having access to this over the last 6 to 9 months actually brings it home to our audience that this is something worth supporting and worth preserving, but in a way that's got to be new and vibrant. And that, I think, is the lesson that we all have to learn. Thank you, everybody. I've thoroughly enjoyed the session today, for morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are in the world. Mr. Kim, Ms. Feldman, Lassit, Vilma, and of course, Claire, thank you so much for your contribution. And if you have any further contribution, please feel free to keep the conversation going online. We'll keep monitoring it. And for those of you who have been up all night, you can now go to bed. Enjoy. Thank you so much. I will pass it across back to Rochelle, to just give us some information about upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. To all AAPPAC full members, we will be serving you the notice for our annual general meeting. This will be conducted via Zoom on the 30th of September. I'm sure all of you have enjoyed today's session and gained many valuable insights. So do save the date and join us for our 4th session on the 30th of October. More details on the topic and speakers will be sent out soon. Please also give us your feedback for the session. You can scan the QR code that should be on the screen right now. If you have topics that you're interested in, do also let us know. So thank you everyone once again for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers as well as our host, West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, Duncan, Alison, Josie, and the team. Thank you all. See you all at the next session. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Done? Great.
Thank you.
Okay, I've left here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great feedback on the side. Everyone.
They seemed to enjoy it. It was good.
Well done. Well moderated.
Was that okay?
That was rousing at the end. I was inspired.
Have to. And I believe it, honestly. People should come back wanting more after this hiatus.
How can they not? I mean, if you look at the digital response, what did people do at home but look at art online?